So good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure, and welcome to this session. I think it's number 6 of the Week of Science. So it's a great pleasure to see as many of you here, of course. So this session is entitled Harmonizing Complexity, Perceptions by Natural and Social Sciences. As you can imagine, we are trying to conquer spaces that have become hidden to us, dare I say. Natural and human scientists occupy conventionally not only separate spaces, but separate times too. The fact is that the scientific method and science in general has steadily become specialized, too specialized, particularly in the last 2 centuries, which coincides with, surprise, surprise, the emergence of modernity. And the paradigm that preaches specialization became the norm, and those seeking to understand the self and life itself. So indeed, many wondered why I have chosen to mix in today's session 2 areas that are seemingly different one from the other in a discussion that is already complex as it is, and I have resisted to answer because, honestly, my arguments were of the intuitive kind, so they would not make a lot of sense. I'm rather engaging together with my guests and with all of you today in a rehearsal that will help us speak to each other, discover the common denominators, social and human scientists, and maybe even inspire and be inspired to shed some light on concepts that might or might not be familiar to each one of us. So together we will inaugurate a UM6P discussion between natural scientists and that of philosophy and culture, and I believe we couldn't have chosen a better subject than complexity for the purpose. So before we get in the subject, let me start with some ground notions. I have a presentation here. So first, it is worth noting that complexity has proven to be a fundamental feature of our universe that is not amendable to our traditional methods of modern science. Nevertheless, a proper formulation to structure and give definition to the broad framework of complexity, including complexity theory, is yet to be developed and is therefore presented as a composite of 4 major systems that encompass the main perspective on complex systems. So I think very, very briefly and simply have the 4, the self-organization, the complex adaptive systems, comes largely from cybernetics and computer science, the network theory driven data science, and of course nonlinear systems, which comes largely from physics, mathematics, and the study of far from equilibrium process chemistry. But we will not get into complex theory and its intricate details, as I believe they are treated by experts in the other sessions. Instead, I want to focus on exploring the notion of complexity, a friend or a foe, which is the title of this whole week, but from the different perspective of the scientists giving lectures today, and also from our panel. What I have shared here is a telling example of how complexity plays a unique role in contemporary science. This emerging post-Newtonian paradigm, well exposed in general relativity and quantum dynamics, presents a core challenge for the 21st century. And this new paradigm seems to deeply question the way we see the world and our environment. So this leads me to a few questions, and I hope that the panel today will treat some of them. The first one is, what is understanding? I think I already mentioned a few words about that. And could it be an objective in itself, understanding, or is it the path, or just a means to an endless process? And the second question is, what triggers the need for increased decrease of complexity? Is it crisis, as Edgar Morin seems to have insinuated in his lecture, in this plenary lecture? Maybe. So now we're gonna have a panel discussion, and we have, of course, our speakers, but we also have with us Professor Ali bin Mkhlouf. I think some of you know him because he's given a course with us on ethics, at least, and with us online all the way from Japan. I think where the time is probably about midnight or just before midnight is Dr. Youssef Iguider. Youssef, are you with us? Excellent. So you made it through the first two parts, so we're very proud and happy to have you with us. Youssef is also a contributor to our programs at the MSN department. He is the Vice President of Business Development at the respective and the representative country director of Stanford Research Institute International in Japan. He has 30 years of experience in information technology and telecommunications with world-leading US and Japanese companies. As the head of Stanford Research Institute's Japan office, Iguider partners with cross-functional and cross-geography teams to identify, prioritize, and develop key global partners and bring SRI innovations to the marketplace. Iguider has a master's degree in computer science from the Odisha State Polytechnic University and completed his doctoral program in computer science at the University of Electrocommunications in Tokyo, Japan. He is also the founder and first president of the Moroccan Business Club in Japan, a council leader of the US-Japan Council, a board member of the Japan Center for Moroccan Studies, a member of the Japan-Morocco Association, and former vice president of the Moroccan Association of Research and Scholars, MARS. In 2005, he was awarded the Royal Order of the Throne. So welcome once again, Dr. Iguider. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. He was with us last year as well, if you remember, but he was a speaker then. So now, as a member of this panel, I'd like to go to Dr. Iguider, and please feel free to share with us your thoughts around the subject. We're very open to hear your point of view. I know that as somebody who's working with augmented humanity, among other things, complexity is certainly a friend of yours, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Jonas. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well.
Well, thank you again for having me. I'm very proud and honored, very pleased to be here with you today. Also, I enjoyed very much the speech of both speakers. Was very inspiring talks, both. Congratulations and thank you for that. Well, about complexity, I think this is an emerging subject these latest years. I think for many reasons. First, because our world is getting more and more globalized. So globalization is playing a huge role in terms of complexity, and this bringing with it many changes. An increasingly networked world, an interconnected world. We are all interconnected now. We are seeing in the industry, technology, research and development, so we're very close to the industry. So we are seeing now a cross-industry competition taking off, cross-geography competition taking off. So the complexity is getting fierce and fierce. On the other hand, and to the question whether complexity is a good thing, bad thing, is it our friend, our enemy? We heard already a few answers to that. Professor Schneider in his thought, the way I perceived it is throughout the designs of the material science designs, he and his team are trying to decrease the complexity, liberation the designs. And also, I think this is because in the material science and in the nature in general, complexity is already there, is existing. So as Professor Schneider himself talking about the measurement of hydrogen, ignoring it does not mean that it's not there. So either you deal with it and leverage it or not. So dealing with addressing complexity, I see it like dealing with a challenge. Whereas Professor Sabri was optimistic, saying that complexity is not necessarily a negative thing. Dr. Bimahluf also, of course, he says that it's a very good thing, it's a positive thing. The way I have to see it is that complexity can be either a challenge or an opportunity. It depends on how we deal with it. It depends on how we address it. So if we ignore it, and it's happening, as for the case of the hydrogen, it's happening. We want it or not. So if we ignore it, that could be an enemy, could be a challenge. If we get to creatively leverage it and adapt it to serve our purposes, so that in that case could be a huge opportunity, could be a very good friend of ours. And again, being in the industry, I can give a very quick examples where the complexity was ignored and where it was leveraged. So in one case it was an enemy challenge, and in another case it was a friend. So we all know about how the competition in the industry got not only cross geography but also cross industry. So we all now have smartphones with us, and I will use that case to explain what I'm trying to say. So for example, in the case of Apple, a computer company, Apple Inc., Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs, he understood about the complexity of the industry and the cross-industrial competition industry. So he jumped in earlier, thought about the concept of iPhone. He saw that more and more people are using their computers to communicate, less to do calculation, but communicate it like we are doing right now. So with mobility, with everything, he crossed the gap by inventing a solution for what we use now, iPhone. So, and that was a very successful project. So I would call this leveraging the complexity toward to serve our purposes. In this case, the industry of Apple. Another is where complexity was an enemy, was a challenge, is in the camera industry. We all know that smartphones, they have very much better cameras than the old cameras. And without mentioning any names, I'm working very closely with a lot of Japanese camera manufacturers. They are all closing their business units related to the cameras. Not even to talk about Kodak, which is no more with us, while Kodak actually invented the digital photo, and they did not make sense of it. So in the camera case, it's a case where complexity was, a challenge, was an enemy. So they did not see the cross-industry competition, which was a result of the complexity. In this context of our context here, being in Morocco, we can talk about many applications in terms of society, for example. Some opportunities can be there. Just came to mind now the opportunity. I read somewhere that the amount of waste, food waste that we all throw away, it's almost equal to the amount of food that many hungry people need. So again, with the globalization, this is an opportunity for innovation. One last thing before closing. Since we are in Moroccan context here, I see the topic, the subject of the diaspora. Moroccan diaspora is an increasing complexity topic that is yet to be explored in order to serve the purposes of Morocco. I will stop here. We can get back to many of these points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Youssef. Basically, we were discussing the idea of being sunk in reality and how useful that is in terms of being able to efficiently see, analyze, and understand that particular reality that you are sunk in. Is that, in your opinion, possible at all to be sunk in a reality? And as Ali said, you're never sunk in anything. And I think Tariq also confirmed that. Do you have some thoughts on that? You know, I know that you guys are doing a lot of these gadgets for virtual reality. Maybe you can see some parallels with that.
Well, thank you. Well, I will take this from, I'm not a philosopher, so I would not risk to go to that field. But indeed, we are working with a lot of virtual reality. In fact, augmented reality was invented at SRI International. Yes, reality, it is probably a relative concept, especially when we are talking about, there was a question today about the life, the definition of life as I think it was like the contents of the experience in our life. So, and we did have a workshop about the human augmentation. So, talking about human augmentation, an experience, there's a question whether experience can be uploaded to a human or not, to the brain. In that terms, we will have a lot of questions to deal with in terms of what is the reality for that person who has been augmented. Again, in the world of robotics, there are a lot of questions, ethical questions. Dr. Aziz talked about the values and ethics. So there has been even some discussions in Silicon Valley lately about whether robots can have a religion or not. And we know, we all can imagine what's the consequences of all this. So again, reality seen from a technological perspective could have many other dimensions than what we experience today as normal humans. I know probably this is not does not address the question that you
Nice, excellent. Thank you for your comment.
Yeah.
So I think what I see here is like emerging two different schools of thought. You have the materialists who are more keen to, well, me, myself included, to see things a little bit digitally, to be honest. We really, I mean, it's a desire from inside, and I can add Youssef to us, I think, a desire to decrease that complexity and to decrease the complexity, while it is actually, and I think Tariq said it earlier on, that for a social scientist, complexity is something that is very important to include in your reasoning, in your analysis, and in the way you look at things. And I think you mentioned earlier on that values and facts are basically entangled, and the complexity would increase as we increase in the broadening of you mentioned the broadening information. I think it was Youssef who also said that geography and economy, which is a broadening again of the space that we are dealing with, would also lead to an increased complexity. So it is, I think, inherent in the study of a social scientist or philosopher who is thinking about all the intricate moments of a situation to really consider that problematic in a much broader sense that we tend to do. I think we really want to control freaks, let's call it this way, as material scientists in particular. So the question is, am I right?
Mr.
Youssef, do you agree?
Thank you. Very interesting thought, to Jonas, on the fact that you've seen that we are in front of two directions about complexity. So my take on that, I think maybe we are here from different fields, and probably because areas like nature-related areas, biology, physics, life science, and so on, the nature in general, the complexity is already there. It has been there. We are just trying to understand it, make sense of it. And like today, we have been talking about the design, material science design. So understanding it, probably we can't even fully understand it, so we are trying to develop models. So modelization of the complexity of the nature in order to do a few things. Whereas in other areas like engineering, mathematical science, developing the systems and so on, so the complexity has not been there from the beginning. We are creating with our getting more and more globalized world. We are creating that complexity. So the approach is different. We are not trying to understand it in order to design or modelize. Maybe we are trying to understand it in order to adapt it to our purpose. So the approach is a little bit different in both clusters of areas. So one is reactive, while the other is active. So I think these are the main two big clusters that I see based on what you've noticed.
Thank you so much. Are you saying that natural sciences are beginners? Of knowledge, of analysis? No, because what I see here is that natural science, minimal computational step is too high, and probably human sciences, sociology, something that's really old, philosophy is very old, has been touching on much smaller computational steps. So it became much more complex, and as a result, if you look at natural science has really developed in the last few centuries only, really. I mean, when alchemy became chemistry, and okay, so we're talking about a few hundreds, maybe a couple of thousands of years, but I suppose that religion and philosophy and social studies, or not necessarily as a science, but as a phenomena, is much older, is as old as human beings. Could that be? So in Japan, I think what I know is the Japanese culture is much different than the Western one in terms of visualization, in terms of closeness to nature. Is there anything close to this concept, in your opinion, Youssef, that Tariq talks about, which is time being a mountain?
Before going to that, I'd like just to add one a small comment on the last question regarding where the future of science came first and was the beginning. This will continue my initial thoughts about where I see natural science trying to deal with complexity which is already there, whereas the social science, engineering sciences are trying to deal with complexity that we created. So basically, we can just say it like God made complexity and man made complexity. We think about it from a religious, spiritual perspective. Whereas, of course, God as creator was there first. So definitely, I'm inclined to agree on the fact that probably complexity based on natural nature probably is the beginning. Back to Japan, and again in terms of time, interesting. I'm living my life in among different cultures. So I live in Japan, coming from Morocco, Mediterranean background, African background. While I have been working for Silicon Valley and communicating with Silicon Valley for the last 30 years. So I kind of noticed that the perception of time is different from culture to culture. Whereas, for example, even when doing a presentation and talking about what happened in the past, what happened in the present, what will happen in the future, people perceive that, and they perceive that differently, and most interestingly, they have different interests in that. So, like for example, whereas people in Silicon Valley, United States in general, what happened in the past has very low priority, almost close to none. Present is okay, fine, whereas the future is more important. So when you are showing a slide about what your plan, what you are creating for the future, it has more importance. In Japan, the present and the past has higher priority. So if there is no past history, what you are going to tell us about the future may not be very credible, I would say. Whereas in our culture, Morocco, we are some kind of in between. So probably this is also related to the history of the nations. Nations which have older history, maybe they perceive the time, the past time, as more important than, or at least equally important as the present and the future. So there are a few books about the perception of time in different cultures, very, very interesting to read about.
Okay. Thank you so much, Youssef. So I think what we're going to do now, I'm going to come to you. We have 10 minutes. We're going to try to, if you want to add something to this discussion, if you have some additions, and then we can close in about 10 minutes. Thank you. Youssef?
Thank you, Susanna. I think this is the last intervention, so I'd like to talk about the future and about complexity. Again, as I mentioned, ignoring the complexity can become an enemy challenge for us, while thinking about it, understanding it, adapting it especially, could be a huge opportunity for us. I mentioned a little bit about the complexity of the diaspora as a concrete application for complexity theory. And the reason I am thinking about this, because I have noticed that the power, the strength of many world regions, let's take the Silicon Valley. Of course, there are many elements to the success story of Silicon Valley, but I think one very important element is diversity. So the diversity. People are coming from different countries, contributing to the innovation culture of Silicon Valley. London area, I think my co-panelists would understand, so also a huge diversity. Whereas I see Morocco, instead of that inbound diversity, Morocco has a unique model, unique situation. People are going to different countries. So there has been a lot of effort in order to address this complexity, but I think it's still an open problem, and there is no model, because only few countries in the world are like this. I think China, India, one of them, but most of people from those countries, they go to, say, United States, probably London, UK. So Morocco has I think, to invent a model that would address this increasing complexity problem, and addressing it would open door for a lot of opportunities that will benefit Morocco. So I would like to close my intervention.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well then, I would like to thank our panelists, Dr. Youssef Iguider, Professor Ali Ben Makhlouf, Professor Jochen Schneider, and Professor Tariq Sabri for this great discussion. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too, and let's thank them warmly.